Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today you are in for another treat. So, let's get started. A group of people sat gathered around a small fire in the depths of the forest, their surroundings shrouded in darkness. The distant sounds of nocturnal creatures filled the air, adding to the tension that already lingered among them. A young man sat near the edge of the group. His expression was tense, betraying his unease. Noticing this, an older man approached him, carrying a steaming cup of something warm. With a calm demeanor, he handed the drink to the younger man. "This must be your first time on an expedition," the older man remarked. The young man hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I've been to gates and dungeons before," he admitted, accepting the drink with both hands. "But this is my first time in an unexplored region. That's why I'm a bit nervous." He took a careful sip before continuing. "Still, our team leader is a member of the Li clan, the brother of the family head no less. He must be incredibly strong." At these words, the older man muttered, "He's so weak that he was cast out of the clan. How can we possibly rely on someone like that?" The older man's gaze shifted slightly, glancing toward Li Chiol, who sat a short distance away. His expression darkened with skepticism. Li Chiol had always been a failure. Lowborn, bastard, incompetent half-wit, those were the names he had been called instead of his own. As an illegitimate child of the esteemed Marshall Li family, he was either met with jealousy or disregard. With no power to his name, he lived a life where everything he held dear was taken from him. There was a time when he had dared to dream. When he first grasped the weight of his family name, he believed that if he worked tirelessly, he might one day be acknowledged. When he was chosen by a top-grade weapon during the steel selection ceremony, his hopes soared. For a fleeting moment, he thought recognition might come one step at a time, but reality was cruel. The family elders examined his mana circuits and deemed them an anomaly. His constitution made it impossible for him to learn magic, and its instability prevented him from mastering martial arts. Even achieving the lowest ranks of a warrior seemed beyond his reach. The accomplishments that had once brought him praise were soon dismissed as mere flukes. Those who had once harbored a sliver of expectation for him eventually turned away, concluding that it was inevitable. Still, he persisted out of sheer stubbornness. Despite being told he would never even reach the 9th rank, he defied expectations and became a 7th rank warrior by the age of 25. Yet, to the rest of his family, it was a laughable achievement, one that others attained before reaching adulthood. By the time he turned 30, he was expelled. The only reason he left the iron-blooded Li family with his limbs intact was thanks to his eldest brother's intervention. He disappeared, erasing his traces, living as if he were dead. And yet, 10 years later, the family still found him. When he saw the man dressed in black standing before him, his heart turned cold. The uniform was unmistakable. He belonged to the Shadow Sword Unit, the personal enforcers of the esteemed Marshall Li family's head. The man pulled a white envelope from his coat and handed it over. "This is an order issued to you, young master. Please confirm it." A hollow laugh escaped Li Chiol. Even after all these years, even after abandoning that cursed bloodline, it had come back to haunt him. He broke the seal and scanned the contents. Mission order. Target: 9th Young Master Li Chiol. Objective: investigate the abnormal occurrences in Uncharted Zone BA1. Report to the expedition team by 1830 today. Li Gunsong family head. The Uncharted Zone? A hellscape of beasts unconquered for centuries? They expect me, a mere 7th rank warrior, to explore that place? Do they even realize they're sending me to my death? The Shadow Sword Unit member remained expressionless. "Do you intend to refuse the order?" A chill ran down Li Chiol's spine. Refusing a mission order without just cause meant certain death. His fingers traced the family head seal. So, Li Gunsong became the head in the end. It had been a time of chaos. The uncharted zones were expanding, monster attacks were intensifying, and amidst it all, his father, the strongest warrior in Korea, and the previous head of the family had passed away. His eldest brother should have been the rightful successor, a man of unparalleled ability and integrity. But in the end, the one who emerged victorious was their third brother. The Shadow Sword unit member spoke once more. "Prepare yourself. I will return in an hour." Then, as silently as he had arrived, he vanished. Li Chiol clenched the mission order, grinding his teeth. The expedition started. They reached an ancient ruin in the heart of BA-1. It was unlike anything that should have existed in a land infested with monsters. The architecture was distinctly Eastern, its stone walls weathered yet eerily intact. In the deepest part of the ruin, they found an enormous skeletal structure resting in a vast clearing. The remains of a massive, long-forgotten beast. The Shadow Sword unit's eyes gleamed. "We found it," one of them murmured. Then he turned and spoke again. "Begin." Li Chiol stiffened. "Begin what?" "What else?" "A purge." Chaos erupted. Swords flashed, blood sprayed, and screams filled the air. The warriors of the expedition, already worn thin from the journey, were cut down like livestock. The slaughter was swift and merciless. A Shadow Sword unit member approached Li Chiol, smirking. "Our lord's orders are clear. If you don't resist, we are to grant you a swift death." Li Chiol's grip tightened around his sword. "Shut up." He lunged. His blade met his opponent. The blade pierced his opponent's chest, yet the opponent grabbed the blade and shattered it. The Shadow Sword unit, even when mortally wounded, their bodies regenerated almost instantly. Something was wrong. What had his third brother done to them? The Shadow Sword unit member attacked Li Chiol. He coughed up blood. The sheer force of the attack sent him flying. His body crashed into the enormous skull of the ancient beast. He struggled to rise. He couldn't die like this. Not after everything. Then through the haze of pain, he saw it, a sword embedded in the fossilized remains. With trembling hands, he reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed against the hilt, the sword's blade crumbled into dust. Despair gripped him. "I didn't imagine that someone of the Li clan could be so damn pathetic," the Shadow Sword unit member said as he attacked Li Chiol. Pain erupted as a blade sliced through Li Chiol's lower back. White-hot agony flooded his senses. As he collapsed, his vision darkened. In his final moments, as his life flashed before his eyes, only one thought consumed him. "If I were to be born again, I would never live like this." Darkness swallowed him whole. Then the sound fell on his ears. "Is this the child? Yu Zheng's offspring?" A low voice said. Chills ran down his spine. He knew that voice. The voice was his father's. Li Chiol slowly struggled to open his eyes, his vision blurred and unfocused. As the haze cleared, he saw a familiar figure standing before him, his father. Instinctively, he tried to reach out, longing to grasp the man's presence. But the hands he saw before him were not his own. They were small, delicate, those of a newborn. A wave of panic surged through him as the realization struck. He had been reborn. Li Chiol took in the scene before him. His father, Li Taishin, the head of the Li family and the greatest swordsman of his time, stood tall. His sharp eyes and light brown irises mirrored the very image Li Chiol had seen lifeless in his past life. Yet now he was alive, his presence as imposing as ever. Beside him stood Butler Choi, no longer the frail old man Yang remembered, but a man in his prime. The family head's gaze lingered on the newborn in the cradle. Young would be a good name. That will be this child's childhood name. The butler bowed. "As you command." Assign a nanny and also station a part of the Shadow Sword unit as his guards. "Yes, sir." "When is the steel selection ceremony for the 8th child scheduled?" "Next April." "Include Young in it as well." The butler hesitated. "Are you certain?" The youngest master is not prepared at all, and there is a gap of 5 months between him and the 8th young lady. "It doesn't matter." Without another glance, family head turned and walked away. Yang let out a hollow laugh. His father, the man who had never acknowledged him in his previous life, was now casually deciding his fate once more. Months passed. Though Yang couldn't determine his exact birth date, his nanny estimated him to be around 9 months old. The accelerated growth of the Lee family's bloodline made such estimations imprecise. The day of the steel selection ceremony arrived. From early morning, his nanny dressed him meticulously. She hummed softly as she prepared him, offering gentle words of encouragement, though she knew he couldn't yet understand. "The young master will do well," she said. Though she wasn't his mother, she had raised him like her own in his past life. But he also remembered how she had been cast out by his older siblings and how powerless he had been to stop it. He gently reached up, touching her cheek in silent reassurance. She widened her eyes before smiling softly. Chief Steward Choi approached the family head and said, "The preparations have been completed." The family head responded with a stern look. "All right, let's go." The procession moved through an arched corridor, stepping into a circular plaza filled with spectators. The branch families, vassal families, and warriors of the esteemed Marshall Lee family had all gathered to witness the steel selection ceremony of a direct descendant. In a special viewing stand overlooking the ceremonial grounds, several distinguished figures sat in anticipation, their expressions composed yet expectant. Among them was the esteemed matriarch of the Lee clan, Baek Wei-in, her presence alone commanding quiet reverence. Beside her sat Minister Lee Tae-hong, a high-ranking figure within the clan, his sharp gaze fixed on the preparations below. Also present were two of the family head's children, Lee Myung-jung the eldest and Lee Gun-song the third-born. Both carried themselves with the dignified air befitting their lineage, their expressions unreadable as they waited. Family head's voice rang across the plaza. "The steel selection ceremony shall now commence. Bring wa to me." At its center stood a massive stone embedded with countless weapons, masterpieces crafted by the finest artisans. The eighth sister's nanny carefully placed her into his arms. At the altar, he pricked her fingertip with a ceremonial dagger, allowing a few drops of blood to fall onto the stone as she cried heavily. A deep hum resonated through the ground. Blue light spread across the altar, weaving between the embedded weapons. Then, the light converged toward a single point. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The ivory sword. The blade glowed with radiant light. With a flick of his hand, family head summoned the sword effortlessly across the distance, an act that should have required immense mana control. He examined it briefly before stating, "The ivory sword now belongs to Wa." Returning the infant to her nanny, he gestured for the next child. The moment turned frigid, as if the very air had been doused with ice water. The once lively audience, engaged in cheerful conversations, fell into hushed murmurs. "That child, isn't he? The one for not long ago. An illegitimate child." Whispers spread as countless eyes fixated on the boy. The murmurs subsided as family head's voice resonated through the hall. "We shall now begin Young's ceremony." Young's nanny handed him over. As expected, the dagger traced a shallow cut across his finger. Even in his infant body, the sting was sharp. Yet he did not cry. Family head's expression remained neutral, but his next words were unexpected. "I'm proud." The first compliment he had ever received from his father in 2 lifetimes for something as small as not crying. Lee Tae-hong, the minister of the Lee family, gleamed as he watched the ritual altar. What kind of talent would the boy possess? A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. The minister seems quite interested in an illegitimate child. The minister turned to its source, his expression tightening. "Greetings, head elder." The man before him, Lee Chil-jung, was as inscrutable as ever, a viper lurking beneath an aged exterior. The elder's lips curled slightly. "That child, isn't he the one the patriarch brought in from outside?" "Yes, I heard the Shadow Sword Squad found him," the minister replied. "A steel selection ceremony for a child of unknown origins, born of an unknown mother. I truly cannot fathom what the patriarch is thinking," the elder chuckled. The minister merely clicked his tongue. "Legitimate or not, he carries the blood of the Lee family." The elder scoffed. "Blood alone does not make one worthy. What preparation has this child had? Minister of all people, you should understand that." Minister's grip on his chair tightened. He controlled himself despite his irritation. He knew all too well how the ceremony worked. Each child of the Lee family was born under countless blessings, their paths carefully paved before them. The steel selection ceremony revealed their innate talents, an event steeped in tradition. The family head had been chosen by dozens of swords, rising to become the greatest swordsman of his era. His eldest son had been acknowledged by a sword, a grimoire, and a staff, excelling in both martial arts and magic. Compared to them, a child from outside the family's careful planning stood at a disadvantage. The elder's voice held a faint sneer. "You were an outsider once, too, weren't you, minister?" Before the minister could respond, Yong's blood dripped onto the stone and a burst of light erupted from the altar, drawing all eyes toward it. The burst of light surged forth from the absolute center of the altar. The minister's breath caught with joy, and the elder pale and lifeless, as though he was about to die. The altar's center gleamed where masterpiece-grade weapons and relics lay. The sanguine spirit spear, the iron-welded blade, the holy sword MANHUA, the divine crossbow responsive dragon. The crowd stirred in disbelief. A child, an illegitimate child at that, had been chosen by such great weapons. Gasps filled the hall. Only a handful in the Lee family's vast history had ever been chosen by such weapons. Yet now, countless of them responded to Young's blood. The family head's voice cut through the chaos as he said, "Silence." The whole crowd fell silent following the family head's orders. The family head continued, "By principle, all these weapons should belong to Young. However, the situation is not simple. Thus, I will take suggestions." The minister suggested that granting all these weapons would go against the spirit of the steel selection ceremony. It must remain a tradition for future generations. Recalling historical precedent, he suggested a compromise. The patriarch should select a few weapons, and the child will choose one among them. Family head accepted the suggestion, and at his command, 10 weapons floated before the altar. "Choose, my son," he said. Young gazed at them, each radiating immense power. Among them was Black Twilight, a long, double-edged sword of unknown origin, found by the Lee family's founder in the Uncharted Zone. Despite its mystery, no ancestor had ever awakened its hidden power. And yet, Young reached out and grasped it. Family head's eyes narrowed. "You picked that one." Silence followed before his voice echoed through the hall. "Young has chosen Black Twilight. With this, the ceremony is concluded." Thus, the unprecedented steel selection ceremony came to an end. 9 years had passed since the steel selection ceremony. Now, at the age of 9, Young had developed a strict training routine. "Nanny, I'm going to my afternoon training," he announced. The nanny immediately responded, "Young master, let me escort you." As they made their way to the training grounds, she asked, "Young master, there are other vacant sections. Why do you insist on going to Zone 1? It's so worn down." Young smiled, "Because someone is waiting for me there." Just as he spoke, an unfamiliar voice echoed from Zone 7. "That is not correct. If you grip the sword too tightly, your hands will suffer. You must handle the sword as if it were part of your own body." Turning to see the source, Yang spotted his sister swinging a sword. He muttered to himself, "So, it was the 8th child." The nanny corrected him, "Young master, you should call her older sister. It's only a 5-month difference." "Why should I?" he thought, unwilling to acknowledge the title. "Ah, teacher, why are you nagging so much? Does it really matter how I hold it?" his sister complained, throwing her sword to the ground in frustration. Her instructor, a man who appeared flustered, picked it up and reassured her, "No, my lady, please calm yourself and try again. I am sure you will do better this time." Yong's gaze shifted to the instructor, curiosity piqued. Noticing his interest, the nanny explained, "The one instructing Lady Hua is Captain Baek Lee-hyun. He leads the Black Ebony Squad within the family." He was far too skilled to be training a 9-year-old, Yong thought to himself. The nanny, still worried, turned back to Yong and said, "Young master, I have been searching everywhere. Soon, a great master will recognize your worth." Every child in the Lee family faced 3 major trials. The first was the steel selection ceremony. The second, the naming ceremony at the age of 10. Unlike the first, the naming ceremony was so perilous it could claim one's life. To prepare, the family's direct descendants were given potent elixirs and trained by outstanding masters. Yet, no one had come forward to train Yang. To them, an illegitimate child had no worth. I don't care, Nanny. Officially, children aren't supposed to have masters before the naming ceremony anyway, Yang replied. That may be the rule, but your siblings already have great teachers and consume elixirs. Rules and reality are always different things, the nanny pointed out. He smiled to reassure her. Don't worry, I already have masters. You do? And more than one. The nanny looked bewildered, but Yang simply smiled. Zone 1 of the training grounds was outdated. Its stone slabs were worn, its equipment primitive. Rather than modern training devices, it held only straw dummies and ancient weapons. It was more a relic of history than a training ground, but the armory here holds the oldest weapons, Yang thought. Opening the armory doors, the scent of iron and dust greeted him. He reflected on the most surprising change after his regression 9 years ago, his ability to read the memories of weapons. Gripping a weathered sword, he closed his eyes. From deep within, a dark aura spread, wrapping around the blade. When he opened his eyes, the scene before him had changed. Swordsmen practiced their forms, led by a teacher in outdated martial attire. It is fundamental. Whether advanced or basic, the foundation remains the same, the teacher instructed. This power, gained after his regression, compensated for his lack of teachings and elixirs. Yang followed the other students' movements. His form was precise, unwavering. Steadying his stance, he practiced the Li family's fundamental technique, the 7-star sword. As he completed all the movements, the illusion faded and the black energy dissipated. He knew instinctively he had mastered it. A familiar voice interrupted. Impressive. Yang turned and bowed. Greetings, uncle. Li Taehong, a 4th-grade martial artist and minister of the family, grinned. I am proud that you come to the training hall every day. The discrimination must be difficult, but endure it. I'm fine, uncle. I am also a part of the esteemed Marshall Li family, Yang replied. Li Taehong's eyes widened. Exceptional talent, unwavering diligence, and a sharp mind. Yang had all three. It was truly a pity that he had been born an illegitimate son. With a smile, he said, I want to help you. I would like to be your teacher. Yang shook his head. I cannot accept. Surprised, Li Taehong asked, Are you dissatisfied with me as your teacher? Yang replied calmly, The rules forbid me from having a teacher before the naming ceremony. I don't want to put you in a difficult position. Li Taehong scoffed. Your siblings break that rule blatantly. They have great teachers and consume elixirs. I want to prove my own strength, Yang said firmly. His uncle stared at him. Is this child really 9 years old? His eyes, they remind me of my older brother. With a slight smile, he ruffled the boy's hair. You're as stubborn as your father. Then, as if sensing something, he asked, Is there something else you need? The boy's eyes gleamed, as though he had been waiting for this question. He hesitated briefly before speaking. I would like to ask a favor. Tell me, his uncle said. The boy smiled. I want to see what's under the secret warehouse. Li Taehong stiffened, his expression frozen in shock. He had not expected that. And that wraps up today's recap. For another such treat, subscribe to the channel so that I can bring more such content to you, and you don't miss the daily uploads. Do it. Subscribe. Please subscribe, and don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. See you with another such treat.